Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
We are in the middle of the Rashis on chapter 5 of the book of Shemot, verse 8. We got through some of the Rashis, but not all the Rashis. So chapter 5, verse 8 of Exodus. To remind us of the verse, which I think Sue had read last time, if I'm not mistaken, Viet matkonet halabenim, the matkonet of the bricks, which we discussed a little bit, in terms of what the word matkonet can mean. In modern Hebrew, it's sort of like a recipe. The question is it a quality or a quantity of the bricks that's being referred to here? Whatever it is that's being done to make the experience of the Israelites more harsh. This is in the voice of Pharaoh. Asher heim osim, the amount or the quality of the bricks that they had been making. Tmul shilshom, we discussed that also. Either it means yesterday or the day before, or it means in the ongoing past that they had, like a pluperfect that they had been doing. Tasimu alehem, put that on them, like obligate them. Pharaoh is telling his taskmasters, continuing. Lo tigru umimenu, don't take away from it, don't reduce it. Kirnir pimhem, that's the other word that we haven't fully explored yet in the Rashi. They are something. They are lazy. They are soft. We'll get more into it, but it's a calumny that Pharaoh is accusing the Israelites of. Al Kain, therefore, since they are near Pim, Hem Tzoakim Lemor, they are shouting out, saying, Nelcha v'nizbecha Eloheinu, let us go and offer sacrifices to our God. So Rashi, as we started exploring last time, is interested in the Al-Kain, even though he doesn't name it specifically. There's something about the fact that they are near Pim, whatever near Pim means, which is leading them to call to go out for like a sabbatical and pray to their God. And if they were less near Pim, then they wouldn't have to ask for this, ridiculous break from work, as it were. Okay, so that's where we are. I think we did the Rashi on Matkonet Halbanim, where Rashi weighs in saying this is not recipe like how it is made, but amount. First thing he does is say it's schum, which is how Onkelos translates the word matkonet anyway, and schum is a total, like the amount of it. Schum cheshbon halbenim, the amount of the number of the brook, shahaya kol achad osel hayom, that each one of them would make every day, shahaya hateven nitan lahem, when the straw had been given to them. Oto schum tasimu alehem gamata. Even now, place that upon their shoulders as responsibility. Laman, why? Tichbad avodah alehem, that the avodah, the labor, tichbad, will be heavy, will be a burden upon them. Okay. And I think we also read the second Rashi, the kinir pim, and Rashi is later on in this comment going to actually go more into what the word means, but it's interesting order. First, he tells you what the phrase means, and then he goes into the vocabulary. Kinir pim, he adds in a preposition, min havodahem. Whatever he thinks nirpim means, he thinks it's begging a preposition. They are nirpim from the work. Once Rashi adds in the word mean, it makes it harder for us to translate nirpim as being soft or lazy, as if it is describing their constituency, their constitution, the quality. He's saying that it means something vis-a-vis the work. They are pulled back. They are restrained. We'll go into it, but that mean, that from, suggests that he doesn't think the word means something that just describes them itself, but describes the relationship to the work. And because they are near Pim from this work that I want them to do, therefore they have all this free time. Had they been overly focused on work, they wouldn't have be able to, daydream. But now they have all this free time. Therefore, their hearts, poneh, are turning el habatala, to frivolous stuff, to the opposite of productivity. But so akim lemor, and they are shouting out, saying. Okay? So it's such an interesting accusation of a tyrant, right? Like we could spend 3 hours in this conversation, right? How dare they stop from the relentless work? Because when they do, guess what? They start developing all these thoughts about what they could do with their freedom. Right? Like I don't want them doing that. If they're so burdened from morning till evening with backbreaking labor, they won't have time to dream about prayer, which is why even the time-bound obligations that we have in Judaism, which we got at Sinai, right, in response to being left from Egypt, is considered a gift, because even though we're obligated to do it in a certain time, we are free people who can choose to accept that obligation. Right? We can choose to accept the obligation to be at Minyan at 7:30 in the morning, as it were, which is very different. And we can choose to allow our minds to go, which is very different than if there were a true tyrant putting such obligations upon us. That's, I believe, as far as we got. And the next piece of Rashi is to go into the vocabulary of makonet and nirpim a little more closely. Barry?
Well, just the other side of that, the ultra-Orthodox, they feel imposed upon to in prayer all 24/7, always in prayer and in some mode, because of the idleness of the evil force will attract them elsewhere.
You're absolutely right? And it's very easy to poo-poo that. I remember the first time my parents told me about very, 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 very religious cousins we have in Jerusalem, non-Hasidic, but extremely Haredi, ultra-Orthodox cousins, when we greeted them, we visited them, they forget about the man greeting my mother and extending a hand or a hug, wouldn't even look at her. I was like 9 years old, 8 years old. My father said, and the reason is because lest they have lewd thoughts, right? And for those of us who live in our society, we find that to be, in extreme to the point of being, anti-religious and neurotic, right? I mean, you control your thoughts, but that is a very common notion of modesty in the ultra-Orthodox community. I won't even allow myself to go into a situation where once I'm in that situation, aware of the human condition, I might have thoughts that I'd rather not have. Now, isolated that from a religious neurosis, that makes sense. We're all trying to train our children and ourselves to not put ourselves in situations which, once there, will lead us to think or do things that we'd rather not. But we put the lines somewhere different. But what Barry is saying is absolutely correct, that if you're living in an absolutist religious community, the very things that your minds might go to if you allowed yourself to watch TV or allowed yourself to read secular material, since you know that your mind will go there, you're not going to go to the place that will take you there. And again, we who live in a more fused relationship with the modern society consider that to be archaic and bizarre, but the psychology of it has merit. Just will put the lines differently. And so the warped psychology behind Pharaoh's notion here is actually very much in line with the human condition, right? And if you want to control your population, then don't even give them time to think about what they could do if they weren't in your presence. So that's it ends up being in a short comment by Rashi. Actually, it's really directly from the text, a really interesting statement about what it is to control another, right? And what it is, and for us to ask ourselves what it is we are controlled by, or whom we are controlled by, such that we can't even pull away to think. Okay, now we go into the meanings of matkonet and nirpim, which are the two hardest vocabulary words in the verse. Joanne, are you at a place where you can read the Rashi on matkonet?
Sure. Matkonet v'tochen levenim v'lo nitkenu alilot from Shmuel Aleph, et hakesef hametukan from Melachim Bet, kol lashon cheshbon hem. So mitkonet, it refers to I would say the makeup, the contents, the recipe of the bricks. And then it brings two references. V'lo nitkenu alilot from Shmuel Aleph Perek Bet, which I know is Chana's Tefillah, but I can't quite put together the connection here.
Right. So I'm pulling up on the screen, Joanna. Excellent association with where it is in the book of Samuel. So if you just go back a little bit, Vatitpalel Chana Vatomer. So Chana starts to daven. This is the amazing scene where Chana is praying and she's thought of as a drunkard, because who would imagine a woman would be meditating in prayer with her lips moving? And interestingly, in the 5th parak of Masechet Brachot, an enormous amount of the halakha, the Jewish law, learned about, or at least associated to the rituals of tefillah, are learned from Chana's posture and behavior in this scene. And then she starts praying and she prays poetry. So this is like that. These are all hard phrases. Alatz libi baronai, my heart rejoices in God. Ramak karni baronai. You can see in the translation English that all these footnotes mean that it's very hard to figure out what these words mean. Something like my Karen, my glow is high up with God. The rachaf pi al oivai, my mouth is wide upon my enemies, which is understood to be a gloating. Ki samachti b'yeshuatecha, I rejoice in your deliverance. Ein kadosh kadonai, there's no God like you. Ki ein botecha, there's no one like you. Ve'ein sur kelohinu, there's no rock like you. And now to the verse that we're talking about. Al tarbu tidabru gvoha gvoa. Don't do more of tarbu rav tidabru, speaking gvoa gvoa in a haughty way. Yetzei atak mipichem. There's the negative continues in the phrase, even though the word lo isn't there. Do not let atak, highfalutin, arrogant speech leave your mouth. Ki el deot Adonai, for God is, it's translated as all-knowing. God is a God of knowledge, el deot. And this is a really interesting thing here. Lo, as a homonym, lo can be spelled lamed vav and lamed aleph, and it means entirely two different things. And of course, if it's an oral tradition and you're one of the first people to write it down, you have to figure out which one it was. Lo with an aleph is no, it negates. Lo with a vav is to him. So if it's the lo nitkanu alilot, then it would mean something like alilot, that has to do with like a plot or a development of an idea. Are not established with God, or if it's the lo vav, it's to God nitkanu are konained. All of these deeds, all these actions, translated here as by him actions are measured. The most significant thing for our purposes is the notion that it seems to be a full knowledge of everything that's happening, and therefore the nitkanu is an amount, not a quality of whatever is being considered. And God, being El Deot, according to Chana, has within God's comprehension all of the alilot, all the things, all the plots, all the happenings, all of them are comprehended and known by God. Okay, that's what that verse means there. And then what was the next one? Et hakesef hametukan. Let's go to the next second. Okay. So this is from Malachim Bet, 12th chapter of the second book of Kings, verse 12. What's the verse? V'natnu et hakesef hametuchan al yedei or al yad osei melacha. They would take the money, and I'm going to untranslate metuchan here, and they would bring it to the overseers of the work. This has to do with, Bedek Habayit, the ongoing work that was done to preserve the temple. Well, in context, metuchan seems to be about an amount rather than the quality. It's not that they took the money that had been prepared in a certain way. It's not like the notion of muchan, meaning ready and prepared, but the entirety of it. It's even translated here with a footnote suggesting that, I'm not sure what the word means, that was weighed out, the money that was weighed out, an amount. So Rashi is using these two verses from Shmuel Aleph and Melachim Bet to suggest that mituchan, or that root, in addition to meaning content, recipe, stuff, also means amount, the total sum of what was there. And as Joanna read, kulam lashon cheshbonhem, all the language of cheshbon, math, the amounts of it. Okay, so that's what I say on metuchan, and it's not particularly illuminating, other than to disabuse us of the notion that the word might have meant something having to do with quality. questions, comments, reactions before I have Joanna read the next section? Joanna.
Well, it's interesting because it's, especially with the second reference, if it's a weighing out and a measuring of, each piece of kesef, and remember that, in those days, like I think we're literally talking about, certain, measures of silver that were accounted for, and, Hashem accounting for each and every deed, then the analogy can be drawn to Paro, that Paro is doing an accounting of each and every brick.
That's really nice. It's nice because it also brings up the inversion of it's comparing Pharaoh and God again, right? But in an inverted comparison, right? So being burdened by the incessant labors of Pharaoh versus being blessed by being able to live a life having embraced God's responsibilities on us. And the notion of a miserly and venal tyrant counting out every single brick to make sure that the slaves were doing as much as they did yesterday, versus like the tzedakah counter for all of the shkalim that are going to come in and help make the temple beautiful, right? So the same act of counting out can be seen as obsessive and oppressive, or towards mitzvah, towards sanctity, right? It's fresh in my mind. I'm thinking about what Michael Harris, our wonderful gabbai, looks like when he empties the pushki in shul. You could make the argument that he looks like the classic image of a Jewish money counter, right? He's pouring out the pushki, and every dollar and every quarter and every nickel that's in there, he's counting out. But it's the shem mitzvah. He's trying to make sure that every single penny that was dedicated to tzedakah is making it to the right place, compared to an overbearing supervisor who's counting every minute that someone is in the office, not every hour, every minute, right? Or every micro act of production. That would be considered a punctiliousness that would be oppressive and tyrannical and pharaonic. So your comment, Joanna, even reinforces the inversion of such a comparison. Thank you for that. Okay, let's keep going on to the other word that he's already dealt with in terms of telling us the storyline, but now he's going to get into the language. Nirpim.
Nirpim. Hamlacha refuya v'yadam va'azuva mehem v'hem nirpim imena. I mean, best guess, retriut balaz. Okay. The work was soft in their hands, and therefore it left them, and they themselves were softened from it. And he gives the word in his French for it.
Right. Anyone want to give a guess as to what French word with an English cognate is being produced by retrait? I don't even know how it's spelled.
Is it retreat?
Retreat?
I think so. So look at this. I'll share two more things from my screen. 1 second. I almost ended the meeting by accident. First, let me show you BDB on the root Rafa. Right. So what's Rashi really playing with? So Rafa has several different meanings. Sink down, to go down, sink/drop, or lose heart and energy, relax and abate. I think Rashi's going into that reading, right? To relax and abate. Interestingly, BDB gives us a jackpot. He says in the Nifal, in the word nirpim, in our verse, it means idle, which means, interestingly, that Rashi is disagreeing with BDB, because Rashi is saying that the word doesn't describe them as a them, but describes their relationship to the work, which means I think that Rashi agrees with this relax, abate one, right? They abated from doing the things that I expected them to do, as opposed to just calling them idle. And then if you look here, this is the Safari amazingly has the Otsar Lashon Rashi. So here's our source, Shemot 5:5, Nirpim, retrait, right? This one is spelling it out in English as R-E-T-R-E-I-T. Him'anut, from the root mana, which means to prevent, like to be pulled back from. To retreat, to be not as engaged as you had been. Okay, so let me stop there and see if there's any comments. Renee?
I just wanted to ask if it's related at all to the word rofeh or refuah.
I don't think so. I think that there's a sound that it's connected to, but
different shorish.
Yeah, I think in that understanding of language that sometimes, as we've discussed, the first two letters of a root are connected in a bigger part of the taxonomy, right? So it could be that Resh Pei Hey and Resh Pei Aleph and other Resh Pei 3-letter roots are in the same family, but it's an entirely different shoresh, Resh Pei Aleph and Resh Pei Hey, and Refu'ah always has an Aleph in it. Rebecca Leonard?
Just wanted to say that the Rafa also means one of the Beged Kefet letters that doesn't have a dagesh in it.
Right, exactly right, because it's a softer version of that letter. Correct. It's a letter that's retreating from its full consonantal possibility. Great. Larry, Diane?
So Alter has an interesting note about this, and he says, the contemptuous term invoked here by Egypt's head slave owner, Nirpim, is derived from a verbal root that means to relax, to loosen one's grip, to let go. Is the very verb that's used in verse 26 in chapter 4, when the threatening deity of the bridegroom of blood episode let him go.
Right, Vayiref Mimenu, correct. I'm so glad you reminded us of that, because I had forgotten to make that connection. Keep going.
Vayiref Mimenu.
Right, so if you all turn back to verse 26, the end of the previous chapter, and the end of that odd scene with the circumcision and Tzipporah and the flint, the way that the scene ends is that whoever was doing what, Vayiref Mimenu, the way we translate it is released. Released it. We weren't sure if the it was the foreskin or the person. I remember one reading of it was I kind of threw it down onto the ground. Everett Fox translated that one by Yirf Menu as thereupon he released him, and he translates Nirpim in our verse as lax. So Everett Fox is actually reading these two uses of the root Resh Pei Hey very differently. He's reading Vayiref the way Rashi is reading Nirpim, but he's reading Nirpim as if it's its own adjective describing them, not describing something with respect to the work that they were expected to do. Good. Okay. Anyone else on Nirpim? Next time you can use that accusation if someone's not doing the work they're expecting them to do. Okay. Let's move on. Joanna, you just got a little half Rashi there, so why don't you continue and read verse 9.
Tichbad ha'avodah al ha'anashim v'ya'asuva ve'al yishu b'divrei shaker. Make heavier the work on the people, and let them do it, and don't pay attention to words of lying. Don't pay attention to their lies.
Great. And I'm curious what in your mind led you to translate al yishu as pay attention. Was it context, or is it some association with that root elsewhere?
No, it was just like I got the shaker and just exactly context in the situation. What could be the lie? What
Good.
Could be?
So hold that thought, because Baruch Shekivant, one of the things that Rashi is going to say the verb does not mean is pay attention, but you come by it honestly, because there are other verses in the Torah where you could read Shin, Ayin, Hey as meaning pay attention. Okay? So let's hold that for a second, right? We'll listen to what Rick has to say, and then we'll look at Uncle S. I'm just going to mute you while you're not talking because there's noise in the background. Thank you. Rick.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the noise, whether it was from yours or Joanna's, but I like kid noise generally.
As do I.
Anyway, I just think it's cute. It's a coincidence. I don't know what it is, but for Pharaoh to say tichbad, and the whole thing with Pharaoh is that his heart is going to be kaved, it's going to be hardened. So he says, let it be hard on them, and it's going to come back to him 10 times or whatever you want to say about it. But
that's great. That's
anyway.
A great pickup. In the roots that use regarding Pharaoh's heart in the 10 plagues is both kabed and chazak, right? By a chazek at leif paro, and sometimes Pharaoh's doing it to himself, and sometimes God's doing it to him. But that's a wonderful comparison, right? He's going to create a keved, a kvedut, a heaviness. He's also going to experience it.
Right. And let me also say, I know Tova's the Egypt expert, but again, when you die, the gods weigh your heart against all your bad actions, and if your heart is light, then you get to go on to heaven. If your bad actions are more heavy, then you don't. You go to hell in the Egyptian world. So I there's always that there in my head that the Torah never brings up, but there is that weighing of the heart at the end of Pharaoh's life, kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think Tova's here today to weigh in on that issue. And see her. Renee and then Larry Diane.
So similar to the way Joanna was translating it, Everett Fox also does it similar to that and says, let the servitude weigh heavily on the men. They shall have to do it so that they pay no more regard.
Yeah.
The false words.
Right. Great. So you're in great company, Joanna. And as we'll see in the Rashi, because he makes reference to the verse that you might be thinking of, but he doesn't want you to think that. One comes by that reading of Shin Ayin Hey, honestly. And either you can look ahead, or maybe some of you may even know the verse. Rick might know it as a laner. Larry, Diane, and Rebecca.
This is more of a comment than a question. So the Pharaoh's talking to the taskmasters, but he's talking about the people. So I don't know whether I misheard Joanna, or maybe it seems to me that what he's saying at the end of the sentence is, let the Hebrews continue to do the work so that the Hebrews won't pay attention to the lies. He's not saying don't pay attention to the maybe nobody thinks this, but he's not telling the taskmasters don't pay attention to their lies. So there's two different translations by Alter and by
Larry, before you give me those translations, can you just say that again? Because I didn't follow even the question before the question. Say it again.
Well, I want to clarify that the sentence is talking to the taskmasters, but it's talking about the Hebrews. So when it says, right, she agrees. When it says Va'al Yishu,
Shin.
Sorry, Va'al Yishu b'divrei shaker, it's not saying to the taskmasters, don't pay attention to their lies. It's saying so that the Hebrews won't pay attention to their own lies.
I think you're correct. I think that's the pshat, that the verbs in the sentence are with respect to what the Israelites are doing, not what the taskmasters are doing to them, except for the tichbad. And the tichbad is it's a stative verb. It's let that be let this work be heavy upon them, so that they upon whom the work will be will do it, the work, and they won't show to words of lies. And even the words of lies are interesting. And after we get through the questions, we'll look at Uncle S, because Uncle S gives a really interesting commentary on what this verse means simply by his translation. But I think you're right about that. So then what's the next sentence?
Well, I was going to read the two translations, which I think are pretty clear. So I may be the only one that confused myself. Maybe nobody else was confused at all that he was telling the taskmasters not to pay attention. Alter has the verse pretty briefly. He says, "Let the work be heavy on the men, and let them do it, and not look to lying words."
Not what? What's the last one?
Not look to lying words.
Look to. Interesting. Okay.
And Kaplan has make the work heavier for the men and make sure that they do it, period. Then they will stop paying attention to false ideas. So I think Kaplan's translation is really clear in terms of what the intent is. There's causality there, which we were talking about before. If you make them work, then they won't be able to be distracted.
Right. They agree on what the verb means, the looking to or paying attention, but Kaplan is making the causation a little bit stronger. And both of them disagree with Rashi, which is fine, which makes this all the more interesting. But so far we have not yet said in English the way that Rashi thinks this verb ought to be understood. But we'll get there. Rebecca?
I'm not sure if this is how Rashi understands it because I don't really understand the Rashi.
Okay.
So, but and I don't know if my comment is correct because I don't have good enough control of the form of the binyanim of these verbs. But one of the ways I read it was Yeshu from the word Yeshua, so they wouldn't be saved by these lying words. So don't let them get saved from the hard work by listening to the lying words.
Yeah, I would say to that is elegant and probably not etymologically supported, because it's pretty clear in the form of the verb that the yud of yishu is not the yud in the root, and therefore the root is not yud shin ayin, which would be Yeshua, salvation, but the yud of yishu is the future, third person masculine singular future, like, yidabru or yishma'u or whatever, and therefore the root is shin ayin, and the last letter of the root is a hey, which is dropped off in this form, like yifnu, they will turn. The root is pei nun hey, but when the hey is the third letter of a root, it often drops out in certain forms. So it's evocative. I just don't know if it's etymologically supported, reading it as salvation or Yeshua. Barry, and then we're going to look at BDB, and then we're going to look at Uncleus, and then we're going to look at Rashi.
Well, I just want to clear up this lies. What's lies? We have two realities. We have God's reality and we have Pharaoh's reality. Pharaoh does not recognize the other reality. Therefore, all of that is fake news. He, by imposing the more work, then there's no time, there's no ability to be focused on the other fake news, God's reality.
Good. Okay. Let's actually read Uncleus first, and then I want to do it in that order. So look what Uncleus does here. So the root is is there anyone who does not have Uncleus such that I should pull it up on the? I feel like everyone who has a Rashi should have Uncleus nearby. Speak up if you don't have an Uncleus in front of you in your text of Rashi, because if so, I'll pull up this Uncleus on the screen. Okay. He translates tichbad as titakaf from the root takaf, which means strength. Make it harder. You know that from Adi Hiro. Takifu, one of the things we describe about God is strong. Tokef, the strength of something. Titakaf palchana. Palchana is that Aramaic word meaning service or work. It means, in Aramaic as in Hebrew, the root means both tefillah, worship, like avdut, and also slavery or work. Titakaf palchana al guvraya. Let the work be strong, meaning strongly burdening upon them. V'yit askunba, from root esek, to do it, to be busy with. They will be busy with it. So he translates ya'asu from the root oseh to asak. He basically turns oseh into asak. Let them be busy with it. And then look what he does. He uses the same Aramaic word for ya'asu as for yishu. And let them not itaskun, let them not be busy with bepitkamin, words, betelin, frivolous, senseless, the opposite of productivity. So I would love to interview Unkelus. Hey, Unkelus, were you conscious of what you're doing here? Were you seeing the verb ya'asu and the verb yishu and unconsciously somehow switching around the order of the ayin and the shin, and therefore you're thinking that the two Hebrew words are really the same root, and that's why you're translating it into Aramaic in the same way? Or are you just being a little bit of paraphrase, and you're saying what it's really dealing with here is to be busy with, to focus on. They should focus on this and not focus on that. And Unkelus, you think that even though the Torah used two Hebrew roots, as you're paraphrasing it or translating it into the lingua franca of what the Jews spoke back then, you're using the same root. I'm just fascinated by it because oseh and sho'eh, right? The oseh from Vayasu and sho'eh, sha'ah from ayishu are entirely different words, but he's putting them into one Aramaic word. And interestingly, he does not use the Aramaic word for lie. We are trained to think of sheker as meaning a lie, a falsehood, right? And that we come by that honestly too. There are, we have obligations not to lie in the Torah, and the word sheker is used. There is an Aramaic word for sheker. Betelin is not it. So he's somehow rendering it as not a sheker as a lie, but the type of words and speech that would distract you from the things that are significant, at least according to Pharaoh. Right? Dvarim pitkamim betelin. Dvarim betelin. Interestingly, in modern Hebrew, dvarim betelim is an idiom for like pillow talk. Right? When you whisper sweet nothings to your beloved, it's dvarim betelim. Just, silly things that don't mean much, except that they're very significant in the relationship. So I thought that was interesting. Any thoughts on Unkelus before we go forward? I see that Joanna had to leave for a little bit. Let's look at BDB, and then we'll look at Rashi. BDB does not help so much here. Where are you, BDB? Okay, sha'ah. So he basically says it means to gaze, to look closely, which is what it means in the verse that Rashi does not want us to think is the comparison to this verse, which we'll get to later. And it's the verse from which you could potentially draw the meaning that what this means is pay attention. That's the first thing BDB says, to gaze, to look steadily at. So then he says, when it's with the preposition b or l, when it's with the preposition of b, it has to do with words or statutes. But he doesn't give us any translation of sho'eh that is anything different than pay attention to, look at, or gaze, which means that what Rashi is about to say does not seem to be supported, at least by the modern biblical scholars of language. It doesn't mean he's wrong. They could be wrong too. But it doesn't give a second definition of sha'ah, which is in line with our word. Okay. So now let me call on someone else because Joanna is not available. Stevie?
Unmute. Okay. Just one thing that Unkelus made me think about is sort of, are there two things happening in this verse, or are there three things happening in this verse? Right? Is it like step one, the work will be hard. Step two, they'll be busy with it. Step three, they're not going to be busy with anything else. Or are those last two things really, because the way Unkelus has it, it's really sort of combining them into like one state of affairs is that they're doing this and not that. Yeah. Because he's conflating the words. And the trope, for what it's worth, seems to make it into three things because it puts Yasuba in the first half of the verse and not the second half of the verse. Excellent point, Stevie. If everyone's picking up on that, the way you would lane the verse suggests that the last phrase is really separated from the first two. Tichbad havodah anashim yasuva, and they will do it. They'll do their work because you made their burdens heavy on them. Pause. V'ayishuva divrei shaker, and they're not going to, and they're also not going to pay attention to stupid things, or they're not going to engage or give their attention to things that don't matter, as if that's a separate idea. Great. And again, the Trupp is a commentary, right? And the commentary of the Trupp may or may not be correct. Rick?
You're unmuted. Were you unmuted? You are unmuted.
No, I didn't.
Oh.
I'm okay.
Okay. Good.
Good pickup on Steve.
Let's see. Carol, you in a place where you can pick up from Joanna and read the Rashi? Is Carol there?
Sorry, I'm in a meeting. I can't read.
Oh, okay, no problem. Okay. Who hasn't spoken yet today that may want to read? Joel, do you want to read the next Rashi?
ואל ישבו שקר ואל תהגו וידברו תמיד בדברי רוח. I don't know what Yahagu is.
The Hagita Bo Yomam Balayla, do you know that root? Hey Gimel Hey?
Lahagid.
It's connected to Lahagid, even though Lahagid has a dal at the end. But yes, Hey Gimel Hey is to speak, is to verbalize something. Okay.
So they will not speak and say constantly ephemeral, or I don't know what the word is.
I think that's perfect. I think ephemeral is exactly right.
Okay.
Right? Literally words of wind, but things that to Pharaoh's perspective are senseless and useless and and whatever they're doing, they're not building bricks. Right? Groundless. Good. Right. So the first thing we notice from Rashi is that whatever he thinks Yeshu means, it doesn't mean pay attention to. It doesn't mean turn towards. It has to do with speech. He's literally translating Yeshu as Yehagu v'yidabru, to utter, articulate, and to speak. Let them not continue to chatter about these ridiculous things, such as Lemor.
Nelchan Nizbacha, let us go and sacrifice. V'domeh lo ve'ash'a bechukecha tamid.
Okay, so pause right there. He's about to take us on a Tanakh tour, and it's to some really obscure places. And my sense of why he's going to take us on the following tour is that he knows that there's a much more obvious verse to connect this to, which he'll get to at the end of the commentary, and therefore he has to work really hard to find other places in Tanakh that are not places that you necessarily find on your own, once again reminding us of unbelievably encyclopedic his understanding of Tanakh was, to make the impression that it's these uses of that root that are true in this verse, not the other ones. So I'm going to bring them all up as they come across. 1 second. Okay.
Tehillim 119.
All right. So here's this first one. These three words. Ve'esh'eh bechukecha tamid. Interestingly, was it Rebecca who said before, was wondering about the connection between Sho'eh and Yeshua? Psalms is aware of how similar they sound, and so there's definitely pun in this verse, because the first half of the verse is the root Yeshua, the Ivashea, and the second half of the root is verses ve'esh'ah. I don't think Psalms thinks of the same roots, but Psalm is aware that they are alliterative or they're assonant with each other, and therefore it makes for good poetry. Right? Psalm 119 is the psalm that has the most number of verses in it. It's a triple acrostic, or actually more than a triple acrostic. It's several different verses. Maybe it's a 6-time acrostic. I forgot, with several different verses beginning with the same letter. And so what's happening in this verse? Sa'adeni ve'ivashea. Sa'ad means to like seuda, a meal. Sustain me. Sa'adeni. I lived for many months in kibbutz Saad, which is in the south. Ve'ivashea. And I will be redeemed. I will be saved. Sa'adeni v'ivashea ve'esh'ah bechukecha tamid. I will blank with respect to your laws always. I suppose one could translate this as I will turn to, which is one of the ways that we were thinking about learning our verse. But Rashi at least reads this verse as not to just turn to, but to speak of them. And it's translated here as muse. Muse is somewhere in between direct speech and just paying attention to. There's some dialogue in the mind when one is musing. Okay, so that's the first one Rashi brings us to. Okay, Next one, Joel.
Lemashal uleshnina.
And keep reading. Umatargaminan.
Umatargaminan ulesho'ei.
So this is something that Rashi does, I think, when he's stretching far. When he's trying to give a proof text to help us know what a word means in our verse, sometimes he takes us to biblical verses that have that root, and sometimes he takes us to biblical verses that when Onkelos translated that verse into Aramaic, that's where the root appears. And is it to say that somewhere in the ancient Semitic forms, whether it's Hebrew or Aramaic, this root meant that? Okay, so this is a more commonly known verse. This is in Parshat Kitavo, in the end of the Tochacha, the rebuke that God gives to the Israelites. V'hayita l'shama l'mashal v'lishnina. God drove you out in the previous verse, and to the people in whose lands you live, you're going to be a shama, having to do with some kind of destruction. Mashal, it's interesting, a proverb. I never understood what the word mashal meant in that verse, so when we get to Parshat Kitavo, we'll go deeper into it. And you'll be a shnina. Whatever a shnina is, look how Onkelos translates it. Onkelos Anvarim says you're going to be a tzadu, a matal. Matal you can see as mashal, just rendered in Aramaic, and a sho'e. Sho'e is shin ayin hey root. And what does shnina mean in context here? A thorn that people are going to speak about. That's the movement here. That God predicts that I'm going to send you all these lands, and you're going to be, like, it's weird calling it a proverb. You're going to be the object of people's negative talk. That's what the shnina is, and that's rendered in Aramaic as sho'e, suggesting that the root, at least in Aramaic, shin ayin hey or shin ayin yud, can mean something spoken about. Put that back into our verse. And ba'al yishu b'divrei shaker, they shall not speak of, they shall not articulate words of frivolity. Norm, was your hand up?
You addressed it without being asked.
Okay. Baruch shekivanti. Okay. Next one.
Ve'yasaper ve'ishta'i ve'saper.
Ve'ishta'i. Okay, so now that he's gone in the route of looking for a verb, which is translated by Onkelos into the root that we're trying to decipher, he brings us to later on in Parshat, in the book of Shemot. Now look at the screen again, chapter 18, Parshat Chotno, Parshat Yitro, right? So look at verse 7. Vayitze Moshe likrat Chotno, Moses goes out to greet his father-in-law, Vayishtachu v'yishaklo, he bowed down and he kissed him. Vayishalu ish l'rehu, each of them asked each other l'shalom, how they were doing. Vayavohu ha'ohala, they went to the tent. And then a very easy to understand and translate Hebrew word, Vayisaper Moshe Lachotno at Kol Asher Asah. He told his father-in-law the story, Sipur. Look how Onkelos translates Vayisaper. There are simpler Aramaic words for telling, but Onkelos translates it as the Ishta'e. He sha'ad to his father-in-law the story. This is the clearest one yet, that there is a use of shin ayin hey, certainly in Aramaic, that simply means to speak of, to talk about, to tell the story of. Okay, so those are his, I think, three or four verses that are trying. One of them taking us to an actual biblical root, sha'ah. That's the one from Psalms, and two others taking us to biblical roots that are translated by Onkelos into sha'ah, having to deal with speech. And now he starts to tell us why he doesn't think we should think what we might have thought. This goes back to Joanna's original translation. V.F. Shar?
Before I get to that, it's more than just saying. It's more like repeating. It's not original thought, right? At least the examples that you pulled up. Interestingly,
would you say that also about Vayisaper Moshe? That,
yeah, well,
like retelling.
Retelling, exactly.
Retelling. Interesting.
So they're not making false words; they're just repeating them.
It's like an over and over again quality to them. Okay, V.F. Shar.
V.F. Shar lomar yishu lashon v'yish Adonai el havel v'gomer v'al kayin v'al minchato lo da'a.
Okay, so this is the root. This is the verse that that people who know the Torah well would most think is connected to this root, because if I'm not mistaken, you remember how Rashi took us to 3 examples. One was Psalms, the root was there, and then 2 other were Torah, but the root wasn't there. It was just that Onkelos rendered it that way. I think this verse, which I'll pull up in a second, is the only other verse in Torah where Shin, Ayin, Hey is even potentially used in this way. And this is Cain and Hevel, Cain and Abel. Right? So what happens in the Cain and Abel story? Right? That Cain is born, Hevel is born, Hevel becomes a ro'etzon, a shepherd. Cain is an oved adamah, he's a farmer, but they're each involved in some form of working the land. Vayehi miketz yamim, it happened in the course of time. Vayaveh Cain mipri hadamah min chalanai. Cain decided to take stuff from his agricultural land as a mincha, as a gift to God. Hevel gamhu, hevi gamhu, and Hevel said, "I'm not going to be outdone." And he brought mibchorot sono, from the choicest of his sheep, umechel behen, and for the fattiest parts of the animal. Vayisha Adonai el Hevel v'minchato. The first murder in human history, according to the Torah, happens because God is sho'eh to Hevel and to his offering. In context, he paid attention to. He gazed at. This is BDB's use of the word sho'ah. He looked really closely at it. How does it translate here? Paid heed to it. V'el Cain v'minchato. But the original gift that Cain had brought from the land, lo sha'ah. This is not the word sha'ah meaning hour or time. It did not pay attention to. There's no way to read these verses having to do with speech. Right? It just wouldn't make sense. It's just obvious that it's God possibly paying attention to. Rashi says, I know, reader, that you know the Torah and that your brain's going to go to this verse because it's the first time that this root is used in this way in the Torah, and it's a well-known story. You all know Cain and Abel, and you're going to say, it means the same thing in our verse in Shemot as it meant in Breshit, and I'm going to say no. And the reason why I'm going to say no, Rashi says, is because of prepositions, and we're only going to get partially through this. But keep going, Joel.
I don't know where we are anymore.
At the end of the quote, Bi'al Kain Bi'al Minchato Lo Sha'ah,
L'faresh al yishu al yifnu.
Pause.
Right.
Ef Shalomar. Don't say that what al yishu in our verse means is al yifnu, which means to turn to, pay attention to, even though that's, yes, what it meant in the 4th chapter of Breshit. Why? She'im came.
She'im ken hayal l'chtov ve'al yishu el divrei sheker. Or le divrei sheker. So it would have used the preposition el or le if it's talking about listening to.
Good. Your audio is a little bit shaky, Joel, but I think I heard you say it exactly correctly. Rashi's saying, if the root, shin, ayin, hey, has to do with paying attention or gazing, it requires the preposition el or le, to. In English, to, pay attention to, gaze at, right? And however pluripotent Hebrew prepositions are, and they can mean more than one thing, in this case, el and le is very different than b. We have, and I know we're down a rabbit hole of just L's and B's, we have Ba'al Yishu Bih Divrei Sheker. Had it been Ba'al Yishu El Divrei Sheker, Rashi said, fine, let them not pay attention to ridiculous words. But it's not El, it's not La. And then he has this interesting phrase, and we'll end here, Ki Chen Gizrat Kulam. Gizra here he means as kind of a grammatical rule, for that is the grammatical rule of all the places that Shin, Ayin, Hey is used with respect to paying attention to, and next week we'll get to his examples, it's always an L, always a L. But if it's a B, it's got to mean something else. So we're not ending on any kind of like apex here, but mid Rashi trying to help us really understand with real precision and clarity what a verb means and what a verb does not mean. When all of the dust settles, we know what the verse is talking about, but we're doing a slow critical read, and so we're trying to extract every possible meaning. So we'll end there. We'll pick up right on that spot next week with the final examples that Rashi is going to give us
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.